Okay, so we're ready to move on to part two for this assignment here, where part one was to draw it out, everybody got it sketched out, and then to put your underpainting on, okay? I've already started halfway through, or this first part of that I want you to do, only because it's just painting in this back area here, and I didn't want to do the whole thing. So now I've got all set up here, ready to start painting in, putting in like the real paint now. So I've got my colors all laid out. You can see I've got my 1, my 3, my 5, my 7, and my 8, or sorry, my 9. And then I've mixed over here a little bit of my 8 and my 9 together, or sorry, my 7 and my 9 together to get my 8. And I'm going to start first. I want to go over like how do you usually approach painting in oils? With acrylics or with watercolors, you can kind of just dive right in and go for it. But with oils, you do have to build up some layers, okay? These layers of paint that we work on is called glazing. Now, there's lots of different ways, especially when you're working with color, to apply various glazes of color, build up your color that way. But the process of painting in layers is called glazing. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is after I've established my drawing and I've established where my lights and my darks are in my underpainting, then I'm going to start painting, and I typically paint from back to front. Okay, start with the background first and kind of move your way to the foreground. Now, if you're painting this in one sitting, you can paint the whole thing all at once, then it's a little bit different. But since we're going to have to break these up into different days, today we're just going to do the background and then a couple shapes and then call that good for one day's lesson. And then the next day's lesson, we'll go over a couple more shapes and a couple more shapes. So we'll try to break it up a little bit into some more individual steps to make it a little bit more manageable for you. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pick up my 8 and look at my picture. Now the picture puts it as pure black. Okay, you can put it as a 9 if you want to. In fact, one thing we're going to do is take your value scale you'll need and try to find out where these values lie. Now, my printout, my value is closer to an 8. Even though I think that it's going to be black, I'm going to save my black for a couple areas because it's actually closer to an 8. So if I hold my 8 right next to it, I can see that, yeah, that's a better match than the 9 is. So I'm going to mix my 8 and paint in now all this background here with the 8. Now, at this point here, you want to paint with thicker paint so that your canvas is completely covered up now. Okay, so I've got all this part here done, all this here done. I just need to finish this last little section right here, and I'll try to zoom in a little bit so you can see better of what I'm doing. Let's move this back a little bit. Oil paint gets everywhere. So you can see as I put the paint down, I want to make sure that it's not too thick. If I'm picking big gobs of paint up and pushing it down like that, okay, that's going to be kind of hard to push around. You can't see it very well in the camera. But if it's really thick paint like that, it's going to get out of control really, really quick. And so I want to make sure that I'm not painting too thick. So add a little bit of water. So it's just going to cover the canvas, but without any big gobs. So I'm going to try to spread that out a little bit. Okay, be super careful around the corner. Sometimes it helps to turn your canvas so you get nice clean edges. Okay, learning how to have a steady hand. If you shake a lot when you paint, maybe try to take a deep breath. Sometimes it helps to use two hands. One hand to hold things down, but you have to hold your canvas down too. So maybe you want to tape it down and then hold your hand so you can get clean edges there. But we want to try to make sure that we keep control of our paint. You got to learn first how to control it before you can do whatever you want to with it. Okay. Then, so that we got the background done, now we're going to work our way kind of forward. Now, typically what we would do is work on the tabletop because technically that's still behind these objects here. But instead, what I want to do is I'm going to work with a couple of these objects here at a time because we're not going to do this all in one sitting. If I were going to do this all in one sitting, then I could do the table and kind of work to these objects here. But instead, I'm just going to work on these objects, and then when we're all done, we'll do the table all together because technically that's the closest part here for us. Okay, so Then my next step is let's work on the sphere, the thing right in the center. And if you watched the video that talked about shading, then you will see these individual parts here, okay? So when we talked about, or when I talk about shading, you want to pay attention to these areas. If you can create highlights, midtones, I often call it a halftone. Just depends on who you talk to, but midtone, halftone, kind of the same thing. Your core shadow is your darkest area over here, and then you have a reflected light, and of course, a cast shadow. So these 5 areas you've got to know, okay? I will refer to those quite often, okay? So if you're looking at your photo reference here, you can see that there is a highlight. This is your midtone or your halftone. You can see a pretty clear core shadow and then a reflected light, okay? So we're going to put all of those areas in our little painting guy right here, okay? So I'm going to switch over to my filbert brush to do this one, sorry. If I can remember where I set it down at. Here he is. So I'm going to pick up my little filbert guy and take my value scale to my picture, and let's figure out which values I'm going to use. Okay, so if I hold this next to it, I can see that it's got a little bit of a range to it. Okay, as I get closer to the shadow side, it's actually more in the 3 to 4 range. But if I come over here, this area here is about a 3 to a 2, and of course the highlight we're going to make is a 1 because we want that to stand out really well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in this area here with a 2. Okay, this whole area over here with a 2, and then my shadow side I'm going to make a 6. If I hold my value next to that, it's probably closest to the 6. So that's quite a jump between the light side to the dark side of the object. Okay, and sometimes you'll get that. You just have to watch for that. Typically, it's going to be at least a 2-step value jump from your light side to your dark side. Okay, so let's jump into this here. So now I'm going to take my 2, which means I'm going to have to mix my 3 with a little bit of 1. Okay, and then I'm going to paint in this area here, the whole thing, with the 2. Okay, try to get even. I'm going to do this much quicker than you're probably going to be able to do this. So if you need to pause the video, if I go too fast, because normally I wouldn't paint this fast in class. But just so it's not a super long video, I'm going to do it as fast as I can. Okay, and then I'm also going to put in a little bit of the 2 for this reflected light over here, because if I look at my picture, which I'll bring that up in just a minute, I can see that this highlight here, or the reflected light, is pretty strong right there. It gets pretty close, but because we're going to do some blending, it's going to tone it down a little bit. Okay, then I'm going to, so I put in my 2. Let's bring it through here. I'm going to clean out my brush now, swish it in the paint. Remember not to leave your brushes sitting in your cups of water. You'll ruin them really fast that way. You'll ruin the ends, but you also ruin the handles, and the brushes will fall apart. So now I'm going to pick up some of my 6, which I'm going to have to make a little bit of my 5 and my 7 together to get my 6. Oh, I got a little bit of water right there. Then I'm going to tap in this 6 right through here. Okay, now when I put that down, it's pretty strong and pretty obvious. Okay, it's just this little stripe that goes across. It doesn't quite look like a shadow yet. It will once we blend it in. So now I'm going to clean out my brush, and I'm going to blend those areas in. Okay, and doing so will help to get that transition from the 2 all the way to the 6, because that's a pretty big jump. I don't want it to go instantly from the 2 to the 6. I want it to be a gradual shift. Okay, so we get that nice transition. So now with my clean brush, I'm going to use that blending that we used on that first painting assignment where you kind of work back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to start my brush here, overlap half and half, and just bring it down like this. Okay, and I want it to curve. See how, this is why we did that little bullseye, so you can figure out how to make it curve. So I'm going to take some of this and just kind of work it back and forth until I get this nice soft edge here. You can see every time I do, it's going to pull up a little bit of that gray, and it's going to start to look more like a shadow. Okay, but the tricky thing is you have to kind of rotate your fingers a little bit. If you watch what I'm doing is as I go, I spin my fingers a little bit so that brush stays perpendicular to that stroke. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to clean off my brush again, dry it off just so it's not wet. It can be a little bit damp, that's fine, and then do the same thing for this side here. Just kind of go back and forth a little bit until I start to blur that edge there. You can see once I do, now it's going to start to look more like a shadow as opposed to a stripe. Okay? I want this, remember, this is called a soft edge. I want this nice, clear, soft edge. Okay? Now, so that creates now my midtone, my core shadow, and my reflected light. Okay? Now, the next thing I need to put in is my highlight. So now I'm going to go in with my, since I have a 2, I'm just going to clean off the brush, pick up some of the 1, and start to create this lighter area right here. And I can blend that in. So again, I don't want a spot. I want it to look like shading, so it's got to be kind of a smooth transition. Okay, so I'm lightening that up here. Kind of blending it in as I go, just so it becomes a little bit lighter. And at this point, you can start to get thicker paint. Okay, because you can see the more I blend it in, I don't want to overblend it, because then it'll disappear. Okay, some students, you don't put the paint down, blend the whole thing in. Sometimes you want to put it in and just kind of soften the edges a little bit, and then put some more down. Okay, so the rule is you paint from back to front and from thick to thin. Or sorry, opposite of that. Back to front and thin paint and put thicker paint on top of it. So if you start out super thick, then it's hard to control. Okay, but if I start out thin and just put the thicker paint on top of it, I can get a lot of control. And I like paintings with really big, thick paint. Thick, goopy paint. It's really fun. That's why I like Van Gogh's paintings so much, is they're thick. So you can see now that I have this clear, this definite little highlight, halftone, core shadow, reflected light. Okay? Easiest to see on this sphere. Some of these other shapes are a little bit more challenging. And so for today, we're going to do 2 more shapes, and then next time we'll do 2 more shapes, and then next time we'll do the last 2 shapes, and then we'll finish off the tabletop area there. Okay, so now let's move on to this square here next to it. Okay, and notice we haven't done the shadow yet. The shadows we're going to do when we do, or the cast shadows we're going to do when we do the tabletop. We're just doing the form shadows, or the shadows on the objects. So now, let's set this aside for a minute. Let's go over to our next object we're going to tackle is this one. Now you can see this square here is really pretty dark. Okay, so this is where this value scale comes in super handy, because now I can go in and try to define how dark I think things are. If I hold my 6 next to this side over here, I can see that it is too dark. Okay, but if I hold, let's see, yeah, I'll just use this right here. So my 6 is too dark, my 5 looks pretty good, the 4 is too light. And if you're not quite sure, squint your eyes at it, okay? And I'm looking at this, I think the 5 is too dark. It's really closer to a 4, okay? Because the 3 is clearly too light. So the best match here is going to be a 4, okay? So if you want to, right on the top of the picture, that's going to be 4. Let's see, the top side is pretty dark here. The top is closer to a 7. It's actually pretty dark. And then the side here, that's definitely an 8. So we have 4, 7, and 8. Okay, so now I can go over to my painting and pick up those values there. So let's pick up the 4 to start off with. Put a little bit of water in that. Notice I tend to go really slow once I get to the edges and the corners. Oh, sorry, you can't see. I gotta quit doing that. Here, now we're in the camera. Now you can see what I'm doing. Going really slow around the corners there. You can see the sphere is casting a little bit of a shadow over here, which we'll get in a minute. So I'm going to paint that in separately, kind of paint around that shadow for now. Let's turn my picture over to the side. Okay, so there's my 4. And let's pick up my 7. That I have pre-mixed. So you can see why this is nice to pre-mix all your values before you get going. Now you can just focus on the painting. You don't have to constantly be mixing. So always recommend to pre-mix all your values before you get too far into it. So here's my 7. One nice thing about oil painting is if you make mistakes, all you have to do is either wipe it off or you can let it dry and paint right on top of it. So mistakes aren't a big deal with oil painting. They're not too hard to fix. But that's another reason why you don't paint with thick paint to start out with. So if you do make mistakes, it is a little harder to paint on top of piles of thick dried paint. Okay, so there's my 7. Now I still have my 8 from my background I mixed. And I'm going to put in my 8. Okay, 4, 7, 8. Got it. Okay, so now if I were painting, I would stop the video now and get that part done. Okay? Because we still need to consider highlights, core shadows, and cast shadows, even though it's not a cylinder or a ball like over here. It's still going to have those areas. They're just going to be in slightly different spots. Okay? So I'd pause the video and get this part done. Okay? Once you're done, I'm going to jump in now and put in the highlights. Now, if you look at your picture over here, it does start to get a little bit lighter in this corner over here. Okay? It's not a 1, of course, but it's going to be a little bit lighter. So maybe what I'm going to do is put in a little bit of 3 on this corner and make a highlight right over here. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing over here because I can see it gets a little bit lighter over here. It's actually getting a little reflection above this over here. So I'm going to put in perhaps I'm going to write this down, 3. Oh, I better move this out of the way. So here's going to be a 3. Here's going to be a 6. You can't see that very well on the camera there. Okay? And then over here is where my core shadow is going to be, right along this area here and here. The core shadow is always along the edge between where the light turns into the dark, okay? And then it's get a little bit of reflected light over here. So I'm actually going to put in my 9 for my core shadow right here along this edge here and here, which is going to help to separate these sides. Okay, so back to painting. I'm going to clean up my brush because it's got 8 on it. Pick up a little bit of 3. By the way, you can only do this when your paint is wet. If you let any of this dry, then you're going to have to repaint the whole thing because you can't blend on dry paint. So put the 3 in that corner there. I'm going to kind of wipe it off a little bit. And now blend that in so that it's not really noticeable as being like a spot. So you can see once I blended that in, it looks very natural, and it looks like the light is hitting over here a little bit. I can even go just a little bit more right there. Really kind of brings out that edge right there. Now we also talked about this shadow over here, okay? So the ball is casting a little bit of shadow, and if I take my value scale to it, it's going to be about the 7, which is the same as the top. So I'm going to pick in a little bit of this 7 on my brush and paint this in here. You might want to use your small brush for this one. But I want to make sure I don't blend in the edges too much on this here because I want it to be a shadow. It's a little cast shadow on the corner there. Okay, now let's pick up a 6. Turn it this way. Put in a little bit of 6 right here so it gets a little bit lighter on this corner. Okay, then I'm going to pick up my 9 and pop in this core shadow right along this edge right here. This will help me clean up my edges too. You want to make sure you keep your edges pretty clean. If when you put the paint down, you really can't see your paint, then you're probably painting a little too thick to start out with. So you might want to go thinner with that. Okay, but I can see I just put a little bit of black on there just to kind of brings out that edge a little bit and brings out a core shadow and a little bit of reflected light in through there. Okay, if you can't see it, which I'm going to exaggerate mine just a little bit on the camera because they get a little bit of glare, makes it kind of hard to see. But I'm going to put in just a little bit of this lighter, this is a number 6 in through there, just to bring out a little bit of reflected light, a little bit more over there. Okay? All right, next let's go to this shape up above, and we'll call that good for one day. And if I take my picture, let's pick out the values for it. I can see the light side is really close to a 3. So let's write that down on my paper so I don't forget. So this side here is going to be a 3. It's got a shadow over here, which is going to be a 7. Yeah, it looks about closest to a 7 right there. The top part here is going to be a 4. You can barely see a little bit up there. And then this shadow side over here, overall, it's pretty let's say it's about a 6. Because this is a 7, and we can see that this is darker than this. And this is the game you're going to play a lot when you paint, is comparing one edge to another edge. Which edge is lighter or which edge is darker? But you can see that this is darker, and I made that a 7, so I better make that a 6. Okay, so 7, 3, 4, 6 on that one. So come over here, let's plug those in now. Now I've got a 7 on my brush already, so I'm going to put this little shadow here in with the 7. And then pick up some of the 6. Okay, lean out my brush. I'm going to take my little one now to get that top there, because that's really, really tiny. That one's going to be a 4. Hello, come on in. What can I get for you?
Can you just pick up art supplies for beginning painting?
From McCowan's class or mine? Okay. Okay. Michelle, you got a student?
No. So I already have my art supplies. Do I need to come pick up something else? Or?
Do you have your paper for the assignment?
Which ones? Like,
Very brown.
Okay, so this side's going to be a 3.
Okay, so you have this one?
no.
Okay. Did you get the sphere painting finished?
Yes, I did.
Okay, we'll also get you your supplies for the art contest.
Okay.
So I put an X on the back just so you know not to paint on this side, or paint on that side. And the videos will be up on the module today. And then what art contest are you?
I'm doing the PT A.
Your class?
Yeah, that one.
Do you have a specific like size in mind?
No.
Work on? So you can maybe have you work on the board.
Yeah.
So these, only thing is that you have to gesso it first. Or you can just work on the 3 different canvas.
It's probably easiest to give them the canvas.
Yeah. Okay. Get a size in mind.
No.
Okay, so 3, 4, 6. Okay, now we need to put in the same things. They need to have a highlight, and if I look at the picture, I can see the highlight goes right along that edge there. So I'm going to pick up some 2,
Same thing on this one, so you can cover this. Okay.
or even a 1, because the 1 will mix in with the 3 and make a 2.
Roll it up. Canvas is nice and easy to move around.
And put it along that edge there.
Okay. And you do have your paint.
Blend it down. Okay, and then blend it in so that it's not a stripe.
Okay. There it is. And do you have enough paint?
Yeah, I
Good
have.
enough? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. See ya.
Okay. The top part is so small, I'm really not going to see much of it. You can put in a little bit there if you can't see it quite yet. And this is day 2.
Okay.
That's almost done.
Beautiful.
Thanks. Then I'm going to pick up a 4 and put in the reflected light over here, because if you look at your picture, well, you can